Hello and welcome to the 250th episode of The Actor and the Engineer. My name is Paul James. I'm the actor.
And my name is Josh Knapp. I'm the broadcast engineer. So congratulations, 250 episodes.
Same to you, buddy. How you doing today?
I'm doing okay. We were going to talk about The Irishman, but then we were like, wait a second. This is 250th episode. We need to do something a little bit more epic. So what we've decided to do is talk about Martin Scorcese and all of the films that he's made up to this point, except for The Irishman, as our 250th episode. And that is a daunting task. I guess I didn't realize how big of a deal it was until we decided that and I started preparing for this episode. But he's made a lot of movies, a lot of which I haven't seen, not a lot, maybe like half of which I haven't seen, which is kind of I don't know. I mean, I guess that's a big hole in my film going experience. But what I've tried to focus on was the movies that I have seen, going back to them and trying to understand what I saw in them initially and what I can glean from them if I haven't watched them or rewatched them recently to try to understand more about what he's done as a filmmaker over and how he's changed over the course of his career. So how did you kind of go about preparing for this?
Well, what I did was I went to his earlier films and I said, okay, I haven't seen that, I haven't seen that, and I haven't seen that. Let me at least get the first three in, okay? So I saw Who's That Knocking at My Door?
Wow.
I didn't see Boxcar Bertha. I didn't see that. I don't know, and this, I don't want to make an excuse for, you know how when you're talking about movies and you can tell when somebody's not really seen it, they make excuses almost. They're like, oh yeah, that was really excellent film. And you're like, wait, have you seen this movie? I think there was a point in time when Scorsese was an important person in my film going life, and maybe I started catching up, but I can't remember seeing Mean Streets. So I don't know if I ever originally saw it. So I rewatched it. I'm going to say rewatched it. And I'm watching it and I'm like, oh my gosh, have I seen this film? I don't think I have. But then it seems to be somewhere in my mind that I've seen scenes from this film. Yeah. So maybe I like BS my way through conversations. And this is the honest to God truth. And I'm going to come out of the closet with this comment. I have never seen Raging Bull.
Okay.
All the way through, beginning, middle, and end. Not that I can recall. So I was like, okay, well, this is a perfect opportunity to finally watch this film from beginning, middle, and end, because I don't want to admit I haven't seen this film if we're talking about Martin Scorsese. I mean, it is the film that everybody refers to, with the exception of Taxi Driver. Everybody goes back to Taxi Driver, which I've definitely seen a couple of times, as disturbing as that might be for people. Mm-hmm. So I'm watching Raging Bull, and I'm like, all of this seems familiar. Have I seen it? And I can't figure out if I've seen it and forgot about it, which seems impossible to forget about something like that. Or is it just always in the lexicon of our movie-going experiences and all these clips that we've seen and, you know, all those people nominated for Oscars, and it's this big debate whether or not it should have won up against Ordinary People, which I know I've definitely seen. So I couldn't figure out if I've seen it and just not remembered it. The truth of the matter is that I don't think I've ever seen it all the way through. So that's done. I have seen it. I cannot wait to watch it again. It is a powerful experience. It is that movie going experience where you watch it, after it's done, you're like, this is why everybody talks about this movie, because it is really great. It's daunting. It's troublesome. It's weary. It's not an easy movie to watch on any level. And then it's just, we can get into more specifics about it later, but it just keeps topping itself. You know, begins kind of daunting and it becomes violent, and he's violent. And you're thinking maybe this is going to even out. Well, it doesn't. It keeps upping the stakes. So I watched that, and then I watched trailers and clips of everything else that I've seen multiple times. So I would say I've seen 80% of his films, not including the documentaries, not including the shorts. I've seen a couple of the documentaries, The Last Waltz and stuff like that, and the latest Rolling Stones concert, which I loved. So I would say 80%, give or take. So I've outed myself. I've finally seen Raging Bull.
Well, while we're doing that, I will be forthcoming in saying that of all the movies that he's made, these are the movies that I've seen of his. Mean Streets, Taxi Driver, Raging Bull, King of Comedy, Color of Money, Last Temptation of Christ, Goodfellas. I didn't see Cape Fear. I've seen clips of Cape Fear. I have not seen Cape Fear. I mean, I've seen the original one, but I haven't seen his. Casino, Bringing Out the Dead, I only saw once, not a fan. Gangs of New York, The Aviator, pretty much like all of his newer films, Shutter Island, all those, and then of course Hugo, and then of course Wolf of Wall Street too. Silence, we had a whole podcast on Silence, so if you want to know my views on Silence, you can listen to that. So there's big holes in there, and a lot of it has to do with kind of his early '80s, and then also that kind of like Age of Innocence. I really was not interested in that. I'm surprised Steph hasn't watched that. She may have seen it because that came out like way before we got to know each other, but I'm surprised that she hasn't like wanted to watch it again or whatever. But so there's big holes. I haven't seen After Hours. I haven't seen The Last Waltz, New York, New York. I haven't seen Who's That Knocking at My Door. So I don't know, maybe I've only seen like half of his films, but I feel like, especially since we're in some ways preparing to see The Irishman, which a lot of people, I mean, it seems like it's been, as far as critics are concerned, has been generally praised. And the only kind of criticism I've seen is that some people have said it's too long, but a lot of the people who I value their opinions say that like it's not too long. So I don't know much else about it other than it's 3 hours long, and it has De Niro and Pacino and Pesci and all those guys in there. So what I ended up doing this past week is going back and watching all of his gangster movies, and movies that are related to not specifically gangsters, but also Raging Bull, which is not necessarily a gangster thing, but is somewhat of an Italian American, New York City focus. And then I rewatched Mean Streets. I watched portions of Taxi Driver. I rewatched portions of Raging Bull, King of Comedy, and also I totally rewatched Goodfellas and Casino. And then to begin it all, I rewatched Wolf of Wall Street, which I love that movie, and it's
the best.
It's amazing.
The best.
It's so amazing what he does with that film. I guess we can maybe get into specifics on some of these before, but what do you think? I'll kind of tell you like what I feel his focus has been throughout his career, and he's kind of like moved in and out on certain subjects, but it seems like there's always elements of religion and specifically Catholicism, because he grew up Catholic, and his struggle with reckoning his Catholicism and his faith and his view, what seems to be his character's view on original sin and how they feel about themselves and how they feel about themselves in relation to the church. You see that a lot. I mean, the Harvey Keitel's character in Mean Streets is tied into the church in a certain way, but then also you can tell his character feels trapped by the church and also feels trapped by his relationship to all the people in his community, and feels kind of hemmed in by that. And you see that throughout a lot of Keitel's films, with relationship to religion, but then also masculinity too. How the men in his film feel like they should be men and how they should represent what being a man is. And most of the time, it's what you may feel about yourself, but then there's also the projection of yourself as a man that you're pushing out on society. And especially in his gangster movies, a lot of the Joe Pesci characters in these films are like, if you look at me the wrong way, that's all I need to feel threatened, and I'm going to react accordingly. So, or what he feels like is accordingly. So that those things kind of go together in a stew, and Scorsese is able to make films with different subject matters, but they'd always come back to kind of some of these touch points. And he can also look at them from different angles. He also talks about, and he also uses clips of movies in his movies to represent or to bolster his argument, because he's such a fan of film, obviously. And then also because he feels like that's what these characters are seeing, and these characters are experiencing art and then reflecting that art back on their society. So
I think that after you watch all of those films, I think that Amazon Prime should be connected to your IMDb list or your watch list. And if you watch more than 5 Martin Scorsese films in a week, they should send you Xanax automatically in the mail, because you need something to like de-escalate and get out of the frame of mind. That is a high holy compliment I mean, I've got nothing but great things to say about Martin Scorsese. I will never publicly, and I've said this before on this podcast, say anything bad about him because, first of all, that's not where we come from on this podcast. We're always looking at the positive. And it's so much easier to stick with all of the great things that he's done versus anything that you might want to pull apart or something that didn't work for you or whatever. I mean, it just didn't work for you. It obviously worked for him. That's why he put it into the film. It is not an easy path to walk watching these films. It's just not. Even the so-called lighter fare ones, if that's what you want to call it, Age of Innocence, Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, Hugo, there's still these troubling things in these films that are daunting to take on. And I agree with you 100% about the religion thing. Now, did you say you have seen Who's That Knocking at My Door? Or no, you have not?
I have not. The first film of his I've seen is Mean Streets.
Well, it's interesting that you brought that up because that theme about religion goes throughout that whole entire movie. And there's a scene where Harvey Keitel brings the girl, and her name is The Girl, as credited. I think it's just girl. He brings her home and they're kind of like flirting and sort of kissing and making out. And then he takes her into his mother's bedroom. And now New York City apartments are small and, you know, a lot of people sleep on the couches. A lot of people sleep in the living room. A lot of people double up in bedrooms. So maybe that bedroom was the nicest one. I don't know. Maybe it's the one with the nicest bed. I don't really particularly know why he takes her to his mother's bedroom. But she makes a comment about a statue, which is obviously some kind of Catholic statue. And it's not, I think it's the tallest one on the dresser, but I'm not sure because she doesn't really specifically say. And he goes, oh, no, don't mess with that one. My mom would pass out. And then they start kind of messing around. And then his conscience starts to get to him. And then he is like, okay, wait, we can't do this. I don't know if it's because of the Catholic symbols all over his mother's dresser. I don't know if it's because he's in his mother's room. Who knows? But then he does something very odd, Harvey Keitel. He gets up, says, I can't do this, turns around, and then sits on the same dresser that he was worried about her touching anything on. And I thought, it's amazing how Scorsese, just in such a small, minute thing as sitting on a dresser, the stakes are higher now, because if he moves in the wrong way and those statues go moving, he's done exactly what he's worried about this girl doing to this statue. But yet he's not thinking about that. He's just thinking about kind of stopping what's happening. And it's interesting how the most minute thing in a Scorsese film could be such the dangerous thing, because all it would take was for the girl, finger quotes, to jump at him, or him to jump off in the wrong direction, or them to start up again and then get hot and heavy, and then the statues go flying all over the dresser, and then it's all wrecked. It's completely nerve-wracking. I don't even know what they say in the rest of that scene, because I'm sitting there thinking, don't move the wrong way. Don't move the wrong way. And it kind of is a metaphor for how I feel about the rest of the film, that everything is teetering on the edge of sitting on the edge of a dresser next to something so valuable. That whole movie. Yeah. Overall, not one of my favorite films of his, but it's you can tell it's one of his first. Mm-hmm. There's some blurry stuff going on, I think is on purpose. The black and white is interesting, but almost daunting. But anyway, the point is that you're right. Religion plays a heavy hand in Scorsese films. Mm-hmm. The other thing that I noticed, which I don't think I've ever noticed before, is that the smallest thing in a Scorsese film is important. How you change a radio station in Bringing Out the Dead, how you change a mirror in a car, how you roll down a window in a car, how you flick a cigarette, how you pop a knob on a cigarette machine, all of which he spends multiple shots on, these simple things. And of course, it's at its top in Raging Bull when you're seeing gloves hitting flesh and blood splattering. But it goes all the way back to just simple things of how somebody puts on a headdress, how somebody gets dressed, how somebody is buttoning their shirt. It seems like such simple things, but for whatever reason, I think he is possessed to show ordinary people, finger quotes, in ordinary situations that become extraordinary situations. Mm-hmm. So to me, it's amazing. The other thing I noticed this time watching all of these films, no Xanax, he has a thing with mirrors. I never noticed that before. There are mirrors in almost every one of his film. You know, car mirrors, dresser mirrors, mirrors in the I don't think it's called a dressing room for the boxers, but in the dressing rooms. And they're all prominent in the shot. And he does that angle thing where he's not seen as a camera operator, or the camera operator's not seen, but the character is seen.
Mhm.
And it's in almost every one of his films. All that's purposeful. What it means, I have no idea.
I think he utilizes those tools. He uses mirrors to help us to connect with the character, because the character is addressing themselves. And then the other thing that he uses in a lot of his movies is voiceover, especially in the kind of mobster movies. And there's really, I mean, most of the movies that I rewatched utilize voiceover. And the other thing that they do is they utilize voiceover from multiple characters, which I don't know if that was common before he started making his films, or if he kind of allows himself to use that as a tool to keep the audience connected to each character. I mean, without the Lorraine Bracco voiceovers in Goodfellas, I don't think we would understand that character as much as we do. And a lot of that probably has to do with that movie has such a fast pace, especially in certain sections of it, that we don't have enough time to focus as much on her. There's other times when we hear the voiceover just from a single character in a film. Mean Streets has a voiceover from Harvey Keitel throughout the film, and obviously the Wolf of Wall Street utilizes voiceover from Leonardo DiCaprio's character Jordan Belfort. And so we're able to, first of all, the main character is able to ingratiate himself to you in as much as he can, and you're able to understand what their motivation is. But it's also an exposition. I mean, that's what voiceover is used for a lot, is exposition, whether it's a separate narrator that's just giving you the lay of the land, or whether it's a character trying to tell you their motivations for doing whatever horrible thing they're about to do. Casino uses it really well, because in Casino, you get these great montages of like, here's how the casino works. The dealer is checking on the players. The pit boss is checking out the dealer, and I mean, they keep moving up and up and up and up. And I love those. I love that kind of like a process filmmaking where we get to see all of it's an explainer. It's, they have these on YouTube all the time. If you go on YouTube, it's like, I'm going to explain to you how, whatever the meat industry works, or how this particular section of this particular country's government works. That's great. And we're kind of used to seeing that now, but this was happening, way back in the day. So I thought that's really cool. I also rewatched The Departed, and that's one another example of there being voiceover. But especially right off the bat, you get to see Jack Nicholson character Frank Costello, I think. He's able to kind of tell the audience, get the audience not necessarily on his side, but give the audience a picture very quickly of like what kind of a person he is. So I was starting to wonder if this is something that is necessary for a Martin Scorsese film, but I think that there's a lot of other Scorsese films. I think I was just focusing in on the gangster movies, which he definitely has a thumbprint on. He uses needle drops a lot, and he uses specific kinds of music, Rolling Stones in almost all of these films. And, where he'll just use a section of a song. In fact, some songs he uses multiple times. He uses Gimme Shelter at least twice in different films. He uses it in The Departed, and then he also uses it in Goodfellas too. So he's able to use those songs, whether it's Rolling Stones or other classic rock songs, or he'll use even kind of like the Shirelles and the Martha and the Vandellas. But he has specific types of songs that he uses. And after watching them kind of all in a row, I started trying kind of like seeing the matrix of like, wait, all he does is just drop in these things and he kind of like brings them all together. But I don't know if he's trying to build a familiarity with these stories and show different things, or if that's just what he feels like it needs in those moments. But I like it. So I don't know. I don't know if I like it because I'm familiar with it, or if I like it because it's novel filmmaking. I mean, I guess by definition, after you do it a few times, it's not novel anymore. But then just watching a good chunk of Taxi Driver, he does the exact opposite. He uses a Bernard Herrmann score and uses like barely any music. So I think he finds what is necessary and utilizes that. You're not hearing Rolling Stones needle drops in silence because it doesn't fit.
Well, let's go back to the narration and the exposition for just a split second. I think what's unique about what Martin Scorsese does is that, yes, it is exposition, but it's character-based. You learn things about Lorraine Bracco's character by her narration. It's important to know certain things, why she does certain things, and why she's motivated, because you don't see them in scenes. You don't see them acted out. You don't see it as a conflict between two people. Symbols, crosses, Stars of David, you name it. It's very specific that Ray Liotta is not Jewish. And why is that important? Mm-hmm. It's not necessarily explaining it. It's more character development. You can go to Casino, which I love when they explain all that stuff, because I don't know anything about how casinos work. And I don't know anything about the functionality of people who work in casinos other than movies. It's more character based too, because if you do this, then this affects the character. If you do that, then this affects the character. Then if you do this, so forth and so on. So I think that narration in film is for exposition, but in Martin Scorsese films, I think he does something just a little bit different. He tweaks it and makes it about a certain motivation based on what the character needs to do. And I don't know if we've, as filmmakers, I say we, but filmmakers since have stolen that and turned it into something more than what it is, where it just becomes exposition, but it seems character-based. So to me, I don't mind exposition. A lot of people don't like to be explained things in films. If it's a necessity for me to understand the world, then explain it to me. But if you're not making sense out of your narrative and then you start explaining it to me to make sense, the film long time ago, Dune, there's a narrator in the beginning of the film. She's not there to explain character development. She's there to explain a very muddled and confusing story that makes no sense to anybody unless you've read the book, which they're redoing, by the way, with Timothy Chalamet, which I can't wait to see.
Denis Villeneuve is directing it.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Like, what? I love that book. And I love the first movie, but I love the book, so it's easier for me to say. So if you're explaining something to me because your narrative is confusing, then I have a little bit of a problem with it, because it sounds like you're talking down to the audience. So I think it's brilliant what he does. And I also think, I didn't know when I was going to bring this up, but I guess this is a good point in time in the podcast. I'm wondering how much we credit Quentin Tarantino and Spike Lee with these inventive things that Scorsese has been doing since the 1970s. Yeah. Not to take anything away from either of those two filmmakers, I've made it very solidly known I love Tarantino and I love Spike Lee. I'm a huge fan of Spike Lee. You can go listen to any podcast that we mention him and you can tell I love him. But really, the one thing that I love the best that I was waiting for in The Black Klansman, which is that shot of the characters kind of like, I don't know what it's called.
It's a dolly shot. Like the actors are on a dolly and so is the camera, and then the actor and the camera move on the dolly at the same time.
Right. And I think now after watching Scorsese films, obviously Scorsese has been doing it first.
He did it in Mean Streets.
Yeah, he sure did.
Now that was a little bit different. That's what they call the Snorri cam. A couple of Icelandic guys came up with it.
Oh, right.
And it's connected to his body. So as he moves, I mean, you see it in Pi. Aronofsky did it in Pi too, and other people have done it. But it's that camera being connected to his body, and as you move around, that's a great performance, by the way. Harvey Keitel, he goes through like about 3 different things in that scene. And by the end of that shot, he's passed out, but he's got people like pouring drinks all over him, and he's just kind of dazed, and it's such a great shot. But yeah, it's very similar to what Spike Lee does.
And the thing that Spike Lee, and I think that he does that same kind of connected camera to Anna Paquin in The 25th Hour. I'm not sure, but it's not the exact same thing Spike Lee does normally. And then Spike Lee's it. And he turns people upside down, and, in Jungle Fever. So it's amazing to me. And then Tarantino, who I love, let me make it clear, love that guy. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is now becoming an Oscar favorite. Thank you. We talked about it. We talked about hopefully that won't go to the wayside because it came out so much earlier. It's not. He just won Best Director at the National Board of Review, I think. Tarantino won Director because there's been 3 or 4 awards given out. Much of which I don't really pay that close attention to, but I do like to go back and see who won those things. Anyway, we have given Tarantino all this credit for all this great music and all these great films that he's done. And now Tarantino takes it one step different than Scorsese. He will use music that's not appropriate for the time frame and make it appropriate for the scene. Yeah. So he did Tarantino it. So he's taken it one step further. And, you know, imitation is the highest form of flattery. But I'm watching all these Scorsese films going, how come we think Tarantino did this when Scorsese did it first? And I'm not saying that Tarantino or Spike Lee are imitating anybody. I'm sure that that's their style and that's how they want their stories to be told. And God love them for it. But it's all there in the DNA of Scorsese films. So to me, it's amazing how these filmmakers have influenced each other without ripping each other off and then taking it and making it your own thing. That's amazing to me. So, but it all starts with Scorsese. It really does, because I don't know of any filmmaker in the 70s who used music the way that he does. And I might be wrong. There could be another director somewhere in the world that has been doing this for a long time, because Scorsese is very open about how he's been influenced by certain directors. And he's, you know, you can't help but take things from people and make them your own. So I'm sure it came from somewhere, but really I'm claiming that he did it first.
As he grew up, like when he was young, he grew up in New York, and he had asthma, and he wasn't able to kind of like go outside or do a lot of the things that a lot of the other kids did. And so his parents took him to the movies a lot. And so that's what kind of got him, you know, his childhood was the Catholic Church and movies. And as he grew up,
Amen.
So there you go. Kindred spirit right there.
Totally, like for real.
So as he grew up, like that's, you know, that he didn't just like make up things out of whole cloth. He was taking and modifying things that he saw. You know, he talked a lot about Powell and Pressburger. Have you seen any of their films, like Michael Powell? The only one I've seen of theirs is A Peeping Tom, where it's like it's a British film about a guy who goes around and films people as he's killing them. He uses one of the legs of the tripod. He puts like a knife on the end of it and kills people because he wants to see their reaction and then relive it. I mean, it is like a serial killer movie before serial killer movies were like a thing. They're kind of known for other films that are a lot more famous. Black Narcissus is one of them, and The Red Shoes is another big one. There was a big, huge kind of Technicolor film about a ballerina, and it's supposed to be just beautiful. So I really do want to see that movie, but the style is like turned up to 11 on these guys. And that's kind of where Martin Scorsese was coming from, I think, especially from the beginning. We kind of see how his style has evolved. The first scene or the introduction to Robert De Niro's character, Johnny Boy, in Mean Streets is a slow motion walk into a bar with 2 women on his arms to the Rolling Stones' Jumpin' Jack Flash. I mean, that you can just translate that into intros. You could translate that into certain scenes in The Departed, the kind of like intros in Goodfellas, even to some extent the Layla scene, the Layla piano break scene in Goodfellas, where you're revealing all the bodies. That's all. You can draw a direct line from something that happened in 1973 in Mean Streets to that film, to a film 20 years later. So, and that's not the last time that he's used those tools either. But those are the movies that are top of mind for me right now. But we haven't talked about some of his other films. Gangs of New York. I know, I guess it's been somewhat maligned. I rewatched it, I don't know, a year ago or so, and I know that the accents are pretty rough. You could say certain things about character accents and all that, but just the fact that you get to watch Daniel Day-Lewis, and I guess they had a previous relationship with Age of Innocence, because Daniel Day-Lewis was he the star of that movie? I'm not really.
He's the lead male.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, without him, the movie can't exist, and he's phenomenal in it, and it's just tight. That movie is so tight.
Is it like the Merchant Ivory movies? Is that kind of a thing?
Well, it's kind of hard pressed to not say it, because you put a corset on somebody and a long dress and put gloves on somebody and show somebody's ankles, and that's what sexually arouses people. Then yeah, it's kind of that time frame. It's different for me because those Merchant Ivory films are all about what's not being said, and it's the same with Age of Innocence, but there's so much raw tension between Daniel Day-Lewis, Michelle Pfeiffer, and Winona Ryder, who was nominated for the Oscar, deservedly so, won the Golden Globe, deservedly so, that it's more about, and I guess Merchant Ivory's is the same way, but it's more about, do you do what is in your heart, or do you do what society is expecting you to do? So if somebody's married, obviously you're not supposed to have an affair, but are you supposed to flirt with somebody? Are you supposed to destroy one marriage because you're in love with the person and destroy an engagement, which is a major embarrassment to somebody? So yeah, I guess you could say obviously they're very similar, but for me, they just seem different. There's something, I don't know, maybe I'm just, rose tinted glasses when it comes to Scorsese, that what he does just works for me. And there's nothing, I would never say Howard's End or Sense and Sensibility, which is Ang Lee. I would never say that they're boring, but I could see how somebody would watch them and not really understand the intensity behind some of the things that Emma Thompson goes through in Howard's End, like how significant this house really means to somebody and how significant it would be for the family to not have this as an inheritance and giving it to somebody who is a virtual stranger. So I could understand why somebody would watch that. It's hard pressed for me to say boring, because they're not boring to me, but I could understand why somebody would be disinterested in things that mean nothing to their life. Something about Age of Innocence is more interesting. I don't know. Not more interesting, just interesting in a different way. So yes, it is, but no, it's not.
Huh. Okay. Well,
that didn't answer your question at all, did it?
Well, I don't know. I'm just trying to determine whether I want to watch it or not. But
I think you should. I think you should, because this is about this filmmaker, not necessarily about the subject matter. Yeah. And actually, I think it would be, I'd be curious to see what Steph had to say about it, because that would prove whether or not it's the exception to the rule, or whether or not it was as interesting to her, because she loves all that stuff.
Yeah.
So is this going to do it for her? And I would venture to say she won't like it as much as you would think that she would, because there's something just off center about it. And maybe that's Scorsese's hand.
Well, and she's refusing to watch Little Women because she loves the 1994 version so much. Like, we tried to watch the 1930s version and she was like, "Oh, this is okay." But the whatever year it came out, I don't know, the mid 1990s version of Little Women was like, that's her jam, and she doesn't want to like give it up. So, but I was like, but look at all the actors. Like, look, if this is what you like, it's gonna be good. But I think in a lot of ways, it's probably similar to my kind of like, whenever I see something, I will internalize it with music, especially in a film. Like, whenever I hear Jumping Jack Flash, like, I'll think about that Robert De Niro entrance scene. Whenever I hear a particular, especially Quentin Tarantino movies, whenever I hear a particular piece of music that hasn't been identified specifically as something else, I will always think of that scene in the film. That happens a lot with like the Kill Bill movies, because he's using a lot of TV music from the past, or music that hasn't been heard in any other context, or it's not super popular until he decides to use it in a film. Then I can't not see that anymore. And maybe that's her view on Little Women, but it's probably still going to be a good movie. It's got Florence Pugh in it. It's got to be a good movie because she doesn't make bad choices. I think that. Did you see the Black Widow trailer?
Yes, I did.
Ugh, that talk about a run, man. Florence Pugh, she's killing it. And I'm kind of like holding the little drummer girl because she's the star of that. That's a show, like well, it's a multi-episode miniseries that was played on Sundance Channel or something. I don't know. It was played on some other channel, and you can watch it streaming or whatever. But I haven't watched it yet because I want to savor it because I know it's going to be good. But yeah, I'm just excited to see anything that she's in. I'm definitely in the bag for Florence Pugh. Back to Martin Scorsese. Maybe he needs to have her in his next film. Let's get them. Let's get them
from
together.
your lips, man.
Yeah.
From your lips to this podcast to the air, because it has happened before. I'm sorry. We can say it now because it's recorded. And after 250 episodes, we have said some stuff that has come true. It's weird.
Yeah.
Sam Rockwell needs an Oscar. Less than a year later, wins an Oscar. You can say that's just coincidence, but it's recorded, so like it's history now. Let's go back to Gangs of New York really quick because I wanna talk about a few things with that film. Do you have anything else you want to mention about that film? Because it's going to tie into.
It's only the performances for me. Like that's what I'm interested in. Specifically, I think that. Taken, dude. Oh my gosh. Liam Neeson. I think that Liam Neeson does well in the short period of time that he's in the film, but then also, there's a reason why Daniel Day-Lewis is Daniel Day-Lewis. And this is one of those characters that he's able to really bite down on and he doesn't let go of it. It's a great performance.
Well, I was thinking about this the other day. First of all, it made me recognize when I was watching, I've seen Gangs of New York a couple of times. I saw it twice in the theater. And I've seen it a couple times since. So that's more than a couple times. It's like 4. But it dawned on me when I was watching clips of Gangs of New York that Martin Scorsese has one theme. It's about obsession, which is not an unusual theme for most directors in film. You know, obsession with owning the 5 points, which Bob the Butcher wants to own all 5 points of New York.
Bill the Butcher.
What'd I say?
Bob the Butcher.
It's better than mispronouncing it. Anyway, and of course, Leonardo DiCaprio's character is obsessed with revenging the death of Liam Neeson's character. And it goes all the way back to Taxi Driver. It becomes an obsession, which became a real life obsession, which is just, art imitating life and vice versa. And so it dawned on me that Gangs of New York is quintessential Scorsese. I think it's one of those films that I don't understand why the length is extended as much of it as it is. It's like watching Hamlet, and then the very end of Hamlet, this army takes over and comes in, and there's this whole exposition about that. You're like, do I really need to know about that character coming in and taking over? Why is that in the play? And I guess a Shakespeare scholar could explain it better than I could. But why is all that stuff happen at the end of Gangs of New York? Is it a necessity? Does it add to the film? I don't know. I don't know enough about the history of New York to know whether or not that was relevant or not. I will go into it knowing that I trust Scorsese as a filmmaker, but it brings up 2 points. It brings up his obsession point, and it brings up his narrative point. If you think about it, and I'm sure there's a lot of people who are into films who could contradict what I'm getting ready to say, but most of his films are not about the narrative. It's not about one character wanting another character's something and they cause conflict, and that's how the story progresses. Really, there's almost no narrative to Mean Streets. What's the narrative? Mm-hmm. There is a narrative to Taxi Driver once he becomes obsessed with taking care of what he thinks is the right thing to do. And of course, the young prostitute, how that plays into the real life situation. But what's the narrative? What's the narrative of Gangs of New York? What is it? It's usually not clear. It's usually based on what the character needs from a situation and what their motivation is, and that progresses the narrative. It's not specific. It's not like, with the exception of Taxi Driver. Taxi Driver is very much A plus B equals C when it comes to narrative. Raging Bull, what's the narrative? He's mean, he beats people up, he gets fat. What's the narrative? What's the through line of the story? So just like we talked about a while ago when I did that play last year called Stupid Effing Bird about the Chekhov play called Seagull, and we talked about how back in that time it was unusual for somebody to write a play in the 18th century about just character development, not necessarily about a narrative. Because what is The Seagull about? I don't know if you're familiar with that at all, but really it's about an obsession about a young guy who wants to write a play so he could be a true artist, then falls in love with a woman who, if he writes this play, he'll get this woman in his mind. Really, that's not a narrative, though. That's just what the character decides to do. So really, Scorsese is a modern day Chekhov where there's not a narrative. And so for me, going into the Gangs of New York, I'm expecting to understand something about the time frame. I'm expecting to understand something about these characters, and I'm expecting to follow it in a story. But what dawned on me the other day is it's not about that. It's about the character development and what happens. And I will say this, because a lot of people give Cameron Diaz a hard time in this film. And I had this revelation the other night in the backyard when I was thinking about it. I do my best thinking in the backyard. Don't ask me why. I also do monologues back there too. I must sound like a crazy man. But I love it. The space and the air and the trees. It's great. I have a big backyard. I realized she's in the wrong movie. It's not that she's miscast. She's in the wrong movie. If she was in a movie where Ryan Gosling played Leonardo DiCaprio's part, and then my mind went, well, who could play, it's Bill the Butcher, right? Mm-hmm. Who could play that character other than Daniel Day-Lewis? And I went, Jack Nicholson could. Jack Nicholson, Cameron Diaz, and Ryan Gosling. Completely different movie with completely different actors would make her make sense. It's not she's miscast. It's not that her accent is bad, because it's consistent, which is all I ever expect, because I'm no one to judge anybody's language or development of how they speak, for sure. But I just think she's in a different movie than they are. It's just the way that it is. Because when she's on the screen by herself doing her stuff, she's spectacular. There's something not clicking right when she's on screen with the other two. They're not miscast. They're just in different movies, in my opinion. So I need to defend her because I think she does a good job in this movie. It's just that she's in the wrong movie. But that brings me to my point. Is it a movie where we're supposed to look at it structurally as a story, or is it just a character development movie? And I would have to venture to say it's just a character movie. And if you take it for what it is versus what you're used to, Once Upon a Time, The Three Little Bears, all those things that we've learned to, and then They Lived Happily Ever After, all those things we've learned as storytelling processes our whole entire life. If we take ourselves out of that, Gangs of New York is brilliant. It's just really well done. I have some problems with the style of it. I have some problems with the way that it looks because I don't know how real any of that stuff is. But once again, I don't know anything about it. And I think that brings me to my first point about the ending of the film. The ending of the film seems so much more realistic than the rest of the film. Everything else seems stylized. I think that's why it's disconnected from me. But it brings up a lot of points about Scorsese that even in his, what some people might consider a flawed film, you still see the structure that's important to him. It's more important to find out why Leo's doing what he's doing than watching him do it. It's more important to see why Cameron Diaz's character is doing what she's doing than watching her do it. So to me, that's a hard thing to do. And that movie's almost 3 hours long?
Yeah, it's long.
It's a long movie. Yeah. So for me, I'll defend that movie. Plus, out of everybody, U2 won the Golden Globe. So for the song, so, I mean, I'm good.
Was that the song at the end of the film? Is that?
Yeah. Hands That Build America. Yeah. And I think that's amazing that an Italian-American director asked an Irish rock band to make this song that is the one that won the award for this film. So I'm good.
Well, I mean, he's obviously dealt with historically Irish areas in the past too. Steph and I just rewatched The Departed last night. And after seeing all of the other films, The Departed is a good, paint. It seems, I'll say it. It's a good paint by numbers film. And I know that it was adapted from, I think it was a Hong Kong film called Infernal Affairs. And so he's working off of that source material. And I haven't seen Infernal Affairs, but I'm sure that Scorsese's making it, his own too. But still, I felt like comparing it to Goodfellas, Raging Bull, Taxi Driver, it felt in some ways a little more pedestrian to me. And I didn't see the particular elements of those other films in The Departed, which is interesting because that's the movie he won Best Director Academy Award for. I mean, I know a lot of people at the time said this is his time, and you got a bunch of stars in your film and it's a big deal. I mean, you got Jack Nicholson, Martin Sheen, and then obviously Matt Damon and Leonardo DiCaprio. And I guess I didn't see the same spark in that film as I had in the previous films that I had just watched. But as a standalone movie, it's great and it's fun. But
that's the question.
Yeah.
That's the question. All right. Now, I've stated very publicly, I will never say a bad word about Scorcese. That's an easy thing to keep up with. I mean, that's easy to do because, one, we try to stay the positive, and two, it's Scorsese. Why focus on anything that, how would I even assume to say, I think it should be this way?
Oh, I have no way to improve that film. Like, I don't know how to make that film better, but I guess maybe the more interesting question would be, why did he choose that film versus other films?
What I find interesting about what you said was you spent this whole first 5 minutes of what you just said about what you possibly don't think work as well as other things. You weren't affected by this film.
I was referencing it to his previous films that I had just watched. Yeah.
Right. But then you ended with, you think that it's a really great film and there's nothing you could find to change about it.
Yeah, because I'm not Martin Scorsese.
Right, but you definitely, and I'm going to contradict what I just said, but you also have a knowledge of film and a knowledge of his film, so you could have an opinion on what you think doesn't work versus what you think does work. So that's okay. I just can't do that when it comes to him. It's like physically impossible to come out of my mouth. But anyway, the point is that if we start with The Departed is a great film, and you couldn't figure out what could make it better, then that's where it should end. So this thing about he won his Oscar because it was his time. He won the Oscar for Best Picture because it was his time. All this stuff is possibly true for the general public. But for me, I go into a movie watching it for what it's giving me at the time. And one, I think it's brilliant that it's not as Scorsese out as other films. It doesn't remind me as much of other Scorsese films. I think that's a compliment. I think it's hard for him to have been doing this for 40 plus years and then all of a sudden keep himself restrained in a way that shows us something different. And I think any other director, any other person at that time, if this was a person's first film, oh my God, people would be going crazy about how great this movie is. The acting is superb. Ironically, I think it's great that people love to talk about Mark Wahlberg in a sense because of Marky Mark and all that stuff. But really, you got Martin Sheen, Jack Nicholson, Leonardo DiCaprio, Matt Damon, all nominated or won Oscars with the exception of Martin Sheen, which is mind-boggling to me. But it's Mark Wahlberg who got the nomination.
Yeah.
And Mark Wahlberg won a lot of critic awards. And Mark Wahlberg was a sneak. They thought he was going to sneak in at the last minute and win that award. And in retrospect, when you look at the list and who did win versus who should have won, you could debate it.
Well,
that Mark Wahlberg could have won.
That's a flashy character too. I mean, you're kind of setting somebody up. I mean, it's just like Bill the Butcher. It's a flashy character. And if you do something with it, then you're gonna get notoriety, or you're gonna get, I mean, I guess there's a way that he could have played it that would have been just boring.
I wouldn't go as far as saying it's flashy. I wouldn't say Mark Wahlberg is flashy. I would say that he's given really all the great moments. He has all the great lines.
I didn't say Mark Wahlberg was
and he's
flashy.
Solid.
The character is flashy. It's written flashy.
You think so?
Oh yeah.
I don't think so.
Oh, okay.
I think Bill the Butcher, who I still want to say Bob, is flashy. I think that even Joe Pesci in Goodfellas is flashy.
Of course. Joe Pesci in Casino is flashy.
Oh yeah, he's great now. To me, I'm more fascinated by his performance in Casino than I am for most of the other things that he's done. Noticed I stopped myself. But I think that maybe Mark Wahlberg's restraint is what makes that flashy character work for me. Cause I'm not going to take the adjective as flashy because it just doesn't, I see what you're saying. Kind of. I'm only saying that to be like, you're
just a nice guy.
There are days, maybe it's the cold medicine. Or maybe after watching all these Scorcese films, I realize what a great life and good person I really am, because none of that has happened to me, thank goodness. But the point is that I think it's unfair to say The Departed didn't deserve everything that it got because it's not this, or it's not that, or it's not, because you could take, and I was thinking about this because people say Raging Bull should have won Best Picture over Ordinary People. They say that Goodfellas should have won over Dances with Wolves. If you're going to go down that discussion, then you have to go all the way back to Taxi Driver and say that's where he should have won Best Director and Best Picture. If you're going to have that discussion, you can't just stop at Goodfellas and say, oh, he should have won for Goodfellas and not The Departed. Oh, he should have won for this and not The Departed.
Raging Bull, yeah.
Raging Bull. You can't do that unless you go all the way back and say it should have been Taxi Driver, because really it should have been Taxi Driver. Really, honestly and truthfully, if you're going to give him a Best Picture or Oscar win before The Departed, it's wrong to jump to Raging Bull, because honestly and truthfully, I loved Raging Bull. Loved it. I get why everybody loves it. But I'm still attracted to the story of Ordinary People more. The narrative of that makes more sense to me. And I know it's controversial, and it's very controversial to bring it up during a Scorsese podcast to celebrate our 250th episode. Yeah. But I like Dances with Wolves, and I think it's a great movie, and I think it's epic, and I think it's well-told storytelling. It's just, it works for me. The integrity and the heart and the soul of that film is intact for me. I thought it was beautiful.
Yeah, the good thing about that is that it doesn't matter what happened in that Oscars. It doesn't matter that Goodfellas didn't win. That doesn't prevent us from seeing Goodfellas. That doesn't prevent us from appreciating Goodfellas, and that doesn't prevent us from celebrating it as a great film. So in a lot of ways, it's going to win no matter what. It's going to win as a film no matter what. If it won the Oscar, then there wouldn't be a discussion on like, oh, this other film should have won, maybe. But then at the same time, it gets this kind of like, now it gets this cachet of the underdog. It's like, you know what you should really, you know what you should really see, instead of just watching all the best pictures, you should really see Goodfellas. And people are able to generate these discussions back and forth. But now somebody's going to see Dances with Wolves and Goodfellas, because Goodfellas still has such a high, is regarded so highly that people aren't going to not see that movie. So I don't feel bad for Goodfellas necessarily for not winning the Best Picture award, but it won Best Supporting Actor, so that's, it's something. It should have.
Deservedly so. Yeah. Deservedly so. Yeah, deserved. And it's just great. And this might sound like I'm trying to save myself, but the truth of the matter is I've seen both films in the last 10 years, Dances with Wolves and Goodfellas again. And Dances with Wolves, between you and I, does not hold up as well as I remember it being when I first saw it in the theater. I do like the extended version of Dances with the Wolves more, because there are things in it that are just weird, just completely off center. To me, it gives texture to the movie that it didn't have. Fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, Goodfellas just continuously gets great. Every time you see that movie, it is great. Halfway through the last time I saw Dances with Wolves, and it's been in the last 5 years. I said 10, but it's been in the last 5 years. I'm sure of it. I'm waiting for the things that I remember being great to happen again during the film. Yeah. And that to me might be that it's not aging as well, which I find interesting. Don't you find it interesting that something plays so well the first time you saw it, and it either grows or it doesn't?
Well, I think
it's bizarre.
In the case of Goodfellas, since I just rewatched it, I think we're used to fast pacing. We're used to a more kinetic pacing of films now, and that film has such a kinetic motion to it. It is able to keep the viewer engaged. But even though you see this in a lot of his films where, and it's a normal trope where instead of starting the film at the very beginning, especially a movie like that's a biographical movie like this is a biographical movie of Henry Hill and the people around him. Instead of starting at the very beginning with him as a kid, it goes straight to him driving a car with Joe Pesci and Robert De Niro with somebody in the trunk. That's how that movie starts. And you're like, wait a second.
Who's that sound like?
Yeah. This is, oh, well, you're right. Yeah. This is going somewhere. And so we immediately you do all kinds of things with that scene. You get to see the Tommy character, Joe Pesci. You get to see Joe Pesci just maliciously stab this guy who should be dead in the back of the car. He's just stabbing him while Robert De Niro shoots him. And so we don't know what these guys' names are. We don't know anything about them, but that sets us up for in the future when we see that scene, like it's, I don't know what, 10 minutes later in the film when it's Tommy and Henry and or Henry says, "Oh, you're funny guy." And then Tommy says, "What do you mean funny? Like how?" And then we get that whole scene. That wouldn't have as much resonance if we wouldn't have seen that first scene. And so we don't know too much about him, but we do know that he will definitely stab a guy, and he would probably stab a guy for telling him that he's funny. And so that sets up those stakes. So it's a way of telling a story that is not just, first of all, it's not specifically chronological, but then at the same time, it is still engaging and active. And the voiceover, like we were talking about earlier, the voiceover allows us to skip steps. The Lorraine Bracco voiceover, where I was thinking about that when we were talking about it earlier, where we don't know, like, why should she like him? Because the first time that they get together, it's a double date and he does not want to be there. He doesn't care. But something happens within like 15 seconds where she goes from hating his guts to like, now all of a sudden, I want to be with this guy. And without her at least acknowledging that in the voiceover, we may not be able to make that mental jump. So, I mean, at least for me, like I don't see that. Like, I don't know if that's a societal thing or that period of time or her neighborhood or whatever. She saw these guys and she's always been attracted to them. And now this guy is accessible to her. I don't know, but we immediately get that from the voiceover and we're able to move on because this movie needs to go places. We need to get to all these different characters, the Lufthansa heist. We need to get to all of this stuff. And we need to move it forward, and that's the best way to do it. And he finds those tools and he utilizes them. The amount of times he uses a portion of music, it doesn't seem like he ever plays a full song. He doesn't even play all of Layla. He just plays the piano coda. That's it. He's able to jump around and utilize music, utilize voiceover, and he's able to give us this information and give us this dynamic film that still plays well today. And it's probably going to play well 50 years from now.
All right, so I'm going to put a capper on Dances with Wolves and Goodfellas.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
Here's what happens to me. No, it's okay. It's okay. I totally get what you're saying. And that to me is why this film continuously grows every time you watch it, because those things like her narration is important, but sometimes you don't catch things like that the first time, or you don't understand the meaning of it until after the film's over with. Anyway, the point is this. They both leave me with a feeling. And Dances with Wolves, although the ebb and flow of the film doesn't work as well for me now, and I might take that back after I see it again, but the end of the film still resonates with me in a way that I feel grateful that I watched it and that that story works for me. Same with Goodfellas. It just has this feeling. Now, the difference for me is that Dances with Wolves kind of leaves me with the same feeling over and over again. Goodfellas, sometimes I hate that movie. Like, I don't want to be in that world right now. And I've watched it with that frame of mind and I'm like, I hate these people. They're awful. Yeah. I'm not saying I hate the movie. I'm saying that it's a disturbing ride if you watch it in a certain lens. And so for me, they both affect me, but one continuously grows and affects me. Mm-hmm. And one is sort of in the same place it was when I first saw it. So here's the question. Is it because we're used to Scorcese which is ironic because we think of Coppola as the gangster movie maker in the United States when really it's Scorsese.
Yeah.
Although Coppola, you can't really take it away
did
from
pretty
him.
well.
But yeah, that kid did good. Is it because we're used to him telling stories about gangsters or made men or people who want to be gangsters, that we're used to that we don't really cherish other films that he's made? New York, King of Comedy, Shutter Island, The Color of Money, which I'm
good
coming out of the
movie.
closet with everything. Well, I'm coming out of the closet with this too. I had no idea it was a Scorsese film. I've seen that movie at least a half a dozen times, at least. Because a lot of people want me to justify Paul Newman's Oscar win. They also think that was a career Oscar win. I'm like, have you seen that movie?
Yeah.
He's really great in it. And I'm fascinated with the shots of Pool. And
there's great
once again,
montages and use of music.
Yeah. And terrific performances, Tom Cruise included. I had no idea it was a Martin Scorsese film. Sorry. Ooh, I feel bad about saying it. Until I looked at his bio and I went, wait, what? And then it all made sense. Of course, that's a Scorsese film. So why do we not talk about those films? Hugo, why do we not talk about these films in the same reverence? Are they not as good of films? Or if another filmmaker made these movies, in particular, King of Comedy and New York, because they're just off-centered in a way. I would love somebody to see Joker and then see King of Comedy, because there's no way you can't put these.
And Taxi Driver. That's the whole. We already talked about this in Joker, but for me, after I watched a few scenes of King of Comedy. I watched the dinner scene where he's showing his date. All of the oh my gosh, that is the most awkward thing to sit in. It's unnerving, but it gives you that insight into his view on fame and his view, which that's what Joker missed, I think. Like, Joker is looking at that, and it's looking at Taxi Driver, and it's saying, like, let me sprinkle a little bit of this, let me sprinkle a little bit of that, but it's not landing the plane. That's my issue. But back to King of Comedy, you can make a tie between that and Taxi Driver. It's someone who's living in society but not able to integrate into society in the same way as other people. I'm not saying that everyone should have to be the same in society. I'm not saying that uniformity is key. I'm just saying that the way that they're dealing with their views and their emotions towards other people is affecting people negatively, and they're not able to handle that. And we're in the middle of it, and we're seeing more of them than more of everybody else. So we're getting a little bit of a taste of where they're at mentally in the world, and it's unnerving, but I mean, it's engaging filmmaking.
So obviously you can appreciate the differences, but why does the world not appreciate these films as much as the other ones? Is it because the other ones are considered great? Goodfellas, The Departed, all these gangster films, Mean Streets, Taxi Driver, even though it's not a gangster film, but you know what I'm talking about. Why is it that Liza Minnelli and Robert De Niro in a musical, basically a musical, directed by Martin Scorsese, doesn't light people up? First of all, she's fantastic in that movie. The movie is uneven, in my opinion, but is it because those films are not as good, finger quotes, as the other Scorsese films? What is it that we don't? Why is it that we don't? Because here's how I think of it. If you were to take, and I said this just a few seconds ago, if you were to take Hugo and Shutter Island and all those films, Cape Fear even though Cape Fear kind of teeters way more into the Taxi Driver obsession thing than anything else. Like Hugo, although Hugo is about obsession. If you were to take those films and put them underneath a director's bio, would we not be impressed by those movies? Would we not be impressed by this director made these movies? Is it because we're so much more impressed by Goodfellas and all these other ones that we don't see these films for what they are? What is it? Why do not people mention Cape Fear in the same light as, or same breath as, Taxi Driver?
Well, I think that we're also not seeing what's going on in the background too. When we're talking about the 70s, we're talking about that is directors run the show, and auteur filmmakers are able to get the money that they need to make their vision and nobody stands in their way. Once you start getting into the 80s, you get into a lot more of the excess. And Scorsese has said that he was on coke all the time in the late 70s, early 80s. And he might not have made the decisions that he made if he wasn't under the influence of drugs all the time. And if he didn't, and if he did have someone there to possibly temper some of the decisions that he made. So maybe the films that he made in that period of time would be a little bit different in different scenarios. But I mean, he made some great films during that time, but there may be big swings, like you said, like a musical starring Robert De Niro and Liza Minnelli, that somebody may have told him either you can't make this for the amount of money you're making it for, or you need to come up with a different way of doing it. So he didn't have anybody to rein him in, possibly. He didn't have a no man, maybe. And that may be, I haven't seen these movies, so I'm just kind of parroting what I've heard from other people.
That's interesting to me, because why have we seen one side of him but not the other? You know what I mean? Like, I just happened to see a movie with Liza Minnelli and Robert De Niro in it. It was like, what is this? It was not because it was a Scorsese film. I later found out and figured out who he was and put it together. I think I'd seen Taxi Driver, which is, it just takes years to get that off of you. You know, it just is there's a reason why people continuously talk about that movie, and it is really a daunting watch. And then I remember seeing Sandra Bernhardt, Robert De Niro, and Jerry Lewis. And I was like, wait, I know Jerry Lewis as a comedian and for his telethons. Sandra Bernhardt, I know her from the Roseanne Show. And Robert De Niro, what is this movie? Why would anybody put these three people in a movie together? It wasn't until after I had seen it that I put together that it was Scorsese. And so maybe my education on Scorsese is different than most people, because I have seen a lot. Like, I saw Hugo not knowing it was Scorsese.
Really?
I didn't know it was Scorsese. Yeah, I know. What is with me?
What happened when you saw him in the movie? Did you recognize him in the movie?
Yeah, I was wondering about that too, because he makes a cameo in almost all of his films, right? And I just started really noticing him. I had no idea that it was him who did what he did in Mean Streets. I had no idea it was him at the end of Raging Bull. I had no idea.
What about Taxi Driver?
Who's he in Taxi Driver?
I just rewatched this. He's the guy who he's in De Niro's cab, and he says like, no, stop here. I wanna look up in the window. Yeah. And he's kind of like the guy who pushes. He gives De Niro the idea of like, oh wait, you can buy a gun. You can kill somebody? Okay, let's go down that road.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, now I know. I don't know, maybe it's something dysfunctional in my brain that doesn't allow me to connect it, but in a way I'm kind of grateful, because I'm not going into a film thinking this is a Scorsese film. I have expectations. I go in to see a movie about a mechanical boy, and this wonderful, beautiful CGI film unfolds in front of me. It's flawed. I have some issues with it, but it wasn't until he was nominated for the Oscar that I went, oh, that's Scorsese? Oh, okay. So maybe I'm just not putting it together when I see him in a cameo, or maybe in my brain I'm thinking he's just doing a small role in a film. I don't know what I'm thinking, because I don't think I connected those dots. I just feel like it's interesting to me that you've seen all of these films, but not all of these other films. And now, we've said this a million times, and we'll continue to say it. You can't see everything. Yeah. You wouldn't have a life. You couldn't eat. You couldn't sleep. You couldn't go to the bathroom. You can't see everything. And with limited resources and time, you see what you can see. And usually you see the things that you're most attracted to, or the things that are talked about that people think you should see. So it's hard pressed to see everything. But I'm fascinated by, there's a whole world out there who do not know these other films exist. And there's somewhere in between where they know they exist, but they don't connect it to the Martin Scorsese world. They just don't. To the point where I can't remember if it was Shutter Island or Hugo, where somebody's like, that's not a Scorsese film. And I'm like, yeah, it is. As a matter of fact, I didn't know either. It might have been Hugo. And they wanted to discuss heavily with me that it wasn't, because it couldn't be, because it was about a mechanical boy and a key and two little people, and Ben Kingsley making movies. It wasn't about people stabbing people in trunks of cars. That to me is fascinating. Speaking of which, I just thought of something. Have you talked about how movies inside his movies are part of Scorsese's canon, but also people making movies and or taking photography to the next level in his movies are part of it too. The only colorized versions of anything in Raging Bull is their home footage, their home films. And to me, I find it fascinating. Not only does he interject scenes, especially in Mean Street and a bunch of other, they're always going to the movies in Mean Street. Let's go to the movies. I just stole $20 from this guy. Let's go to the movies. And that's the first thing Harvey Keitel says. Hey, how you doing? I got $20 off this guy. Let's go to the movies, right? But not only is he interjecting things that I think are important for the rest of the film inside the movie, but he's having people make their own movies, because Hugo is all about Ben Kingsley character making movies and how it used to be.
Howard Hughes.
Yes. It's fascinating how incestual movies are. But, the bottom line is that whenever I talk about Scorsese to people, yes, there's a reverence, and yes, there's an overall wonder about him, that I'm just fixated on how much he's given to me as a film goer. Then I will have conversations and I'll say, everybody has a problem with this film. Have you seen it? Or have you seen this movie? And people don't even know that they exist. So I find that fascinating, that we as a movie-going populace only focus on a couple of themes when he has all these other things that he's done in his career that I think are as important. That's just me.
So we haven't talked about what many people may feel like is the elephant in the room, and the fact that in the first half of his career, he had one actor that was in a lot of his movies, Robert De Niro. And in the second half of his career so far, he's had a different actor that's been in a lot of his movies, Leonardo DiCaprio. So as an actor, what do you feel like he's getting from those actors? Do you feel like they are his surrogate at the time? Or do you feel like he just likes to work with them and they're good actors? I mean, why doesn't he pick different people to be his
first
star?
Of all, it's Robert De Niro and Leonardo DiCaprio.
I understand. But
that's pretty much just period.
There's other actors out there. So why is it that he's focused on that one actor at the time, whereas other people are going out there and finding different actors?
Well, you could venture to say that it was Harvey Keitel until Taxi Driver.
You're right. So there's three then, yeah. And
then Harvey Keitel hasn't appeared in any of his movies for a long period of time. He had his own career, and now he's in The Irishman. Who knows?
Cool.
There's a language.
In The Irishman.
Yeah. Sorry, is that a spoiler?
I haven't seen it.
He's in every promotional thing.
Oh, I just thought it was.
Everybody's
I
in
thought
The
it was Joe
Irishman.
Pesci, Al Pacino, Robert De Niro.
Harvey Keitel, Anna Paquin,
Okay.
Ray Romano, Bobby Cannavale, tons of people.
Cool. All right.
Jesse Plemons.
Of course.
Doesn't that just light you up that all those people in that movie? It's like, can't wait. I do want to tell this really quick story. I did go to watch The Irishman on Netflix before this podcast, even though I somehow knew not to. And I said, nope, I'm going to wait for it to come to the theater because that's where I want to experience this film. I feel like I can give myself over to it in the theater. It came to one theater, my favorite theater in Norfolk, called the Narrow, at 1:00 on a Sunday afternoon or Saturday afternoon. No way I could see it. And I didn't find it out until 5 minutes after the movie started.
Ugh.
And I said, wah, wah, wah. So I guess I got to see it on Netflix. Well, it's coming out tomorrow at 3:00 in the same movie theater. So I'm going to see it tomorrow.
Oh, that's awesome.
So I want to see it. Yeah, I want to see it on the big screen. I started to watch it.
Yeah.
I was about 2 minutes into it and I thought, I feel like we should see this movie before we talk about Martin Scorsese. But we're going to do the next podcast on The Irishman. And something just stopped me where I went, Scorsese's come out and say, don't watch this movie on a phone, on the telephone. Yeah. This movie needs to be experienced. I have a different opinion about things like that. I can watch something for what it is on any screen and figure it out for that screen. I've tried to describe this in the past, but for some reason, when I watch on my computer, I feel like I'm just a little person watching a big computer. I know that makes no sense to anybody else, but my suspension of disbelief allows me to do that. Okay, so why does he work with certain actors at first Robert De Niro, Harvey Keitel, Robert De Niro, now Leonardo DiCaprio, and they're filming a movie together now. Leonardo DiCaprio, Robert De Niro, and Scorcese. It's called Killers of the Flower Moon.
Yeah.
I have no idea what's about. I read something about it, but I was like, I don't understand what that is.
It's Indian reservations, and somebody gets killed, or people are starting to get killed.
Yeah,
based
that's
on
it.
true story.
Sounds fascinating, which I find fascinating that he makes a lot of movies. Scorsese makes a lot of movies about real people, but also fictitious people that seem real now. Travis Bickle, he seems like a real person. He just does. It seems like a documentary on some level. Taxi Driver does. Anyway, in the fact that it's ingrained in my psyche that it seems so real. Here's the thing. I think that actors and directors find a common language between each other, or a common feeling, where you just know that if you do something, the director's going to respond this way. Some people really like working with Woody Allen because he says nothing unless he sees something he doesn't like. That's reassuring to a lot of people. To me, I would hate it. But at the same time, it's reassuring knowing that you're doing a good job and you don't have to be told by the director you're doing a good job, or that you're doing such a good job that he only has to tell you things that he doesn't like. I like that to a degree. I think that you need to be encouraging when you're a director too, but sometimes that's disconcerting too. I recently did a show and it was going really well and I was feeling kind of okay about it. And then the director spent this like 10-minute dialogue on praising me to my face. And then for the next couple of rehearsals, I was crap because all I could think about was how great I was. And I wasn't fighting for anything. There was nothing to fight for. And I must be doing something really right because it just fell flat. And then I had to figure out my way through that again. I think that directors develop a language. And I also think that directors understand that actors don't necessarily have to be the same thing in every movie or every project, that they can be different people in different projects. Thus, the reason why Leo works so well in Shutter Island versus Wolf of Wall Street. Different people, same actor, different results. De Niro, it's sort of the same character in Cape Fear as it is in Taxi Driver, but it's a little different in Cape Fear. Actually, I'm more scared of him in Cape Fear than I am about him in Taxi Driver. And maybe because the character in Taxi Driver doesn't really know he's as left of center, or
but he's not super focused. The Taxi Driver character is kind of moving through life, I think, whereas it seems like the Cape Fear, he's moving through life, disgruntled, but not knowing where to put his anger. And it sounds like, at least if it's anything like the original Cape Fear film that I saw, it's a revenge movie. He's very focused. He wants to enact the most amount of terror on this guy's family, as he can. And that's menacing.
And the way that he does it is crazy. Oh my God, that movie's crazy. It's disturbing. So I just think that a director figures out that this actor either understands his language or doesn't have to understand his language. He just knows his language. There's no figuring it out. They just know. And when you have somebody like Robert De Niro and Leonardo DiCaprio, name something you don't think that they did that was great. My best friend said to me once, what has Leo been in that he's not great? I mean, he's been in okay movies, but he's always been great. So why would you, as a director who is dealing with all of this financing and all of these producers telling you about these millions of dollars that you're spending, why would you spend your time trying to incorporate somebody else into something that has cost this amount of money, this amount of time, and to figure out a new language just to use a new actor? You would want to use somebody who already understands your language or doesn't need to understand your language. They just know it, who is going to be reliable and go above and beyond being reliable, as Leonardo DiCaprio does and Robert De Niro does. Why would you not? That would be one less thing to worry about. But there's a feeling. The director I worked with in North Carolina, he cast me in 2 shows. Even though the second show turned out as great as it was, I was really just out of sorts. All he had to do was tell me, you are doing what I'm asking you to do. I was like, I'm ruining your play. And he said, I assure you, you are not. And I believed him. And opening night, Patrick Torres, what a man. He's just the best. He goes to my church. He's gentle. Oh, does he?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Really? Tell
yeah.
him I said hello.
Sure, we'll do.
Yeah, he's just sweet and kind, but he'll tell you, what are you doing there? Like, what was that? Don't do that. But in a kind way.
Yeah.
Opening night of Perfect Arrangement, I was just ready to expel anything from any part of my body because I was so nervous. And I was giving out flowers, and he was standing downstage, off stage actually. And somebody asked me something, how you doing, Paul? And I was like, oh, I'm nervous. And out of all of the people talking, out of everybody and everything going on, he said, wait, what? And I said, yeah. And he goes, are you nervous because it's opening night? Or are you nervous because, and I said, I'm just nervous. And he said, I assure you, you're going to be great. And I don't know whether or not I was great or not. I have no idea, but I believed him. And that got me through that moment. The whole moment before you take the stage is one thing, but the whole hour and a half, especially there was not a fight, but a love sequence in that play where we had to time it specifically to everything else. Mm-hmm. And so I said fight because usually you practice a fight choreography before that. Same thing with a romantic kind of sex scene. You practice it you rehearse it every day before. It's a technical thing. All that stuff is great when you're not having anxiety about opening night. You're wanting to throw up, and you can't throw up because you're kissing somebody. So that's not cool. You just can't. And because he said what he said, that got me through the rest of the run of the show. It's not that I believed I was going to be great. It's I believed he thought I was going to do well. Mm-hmm. And to me, just those few lines of encouragement continued on for 3 weeks. And I got through it all because of that. He doesn't even remember saying it to me because I brought it up when it went to Canty and all these awards and all this other stuff. I brought that up to him and he was like, yeah, I don't remember that at all. And I was like, what? That's so crazy. Something so significant to one person is just something that somebody does. And that to me is a language that we have between each other that doesn't need to be spoken.
And that kind of brings up my next topic, which is Thelma Schoonmaker. That's his editor, and she's been his editor ever since, I think the first, was it Mean Streets? Was that the first one? Or maybe it might have been his first feature.
Who's That Knocking at My Door?
Yeah, Who's That Knocking at My Door? From the very beginning, they were kind of in school together, or I guess he was in school and she was assisting, kind of like an assistant editor. So they've been together from the very beginning, pretty much, like let's say almost from the very beginning. And she has edited every single one of his films. So that says a lot. And the editor is a really important part of how a film comes together. And I'm sure that they are tied together so tightly that they understand each other's preferences and each other's what they each want out of the film. And it's good to have. I'm guessing that she is definitely his no man or his no woman in this case, where it's like, I know you're reaching for this, but we got to get rid of it, or we really need more of this and less of that. And that's better for someone to have to bounce things off of, who is so familiar with what you're doing. So she's edited some other films too, but mostly she's edited Scorsese films because he's such a prolific director. I'm sure he keeps her busy, but I'm sure she is just as much of a part of how his films have come out and how they've been created and presented to the public as Martin Scorsese in a lot of ways. The ideas may start with him, or he's obviously boots on the ground when it comes to pre-production and production, but without a good editor, your movie can be really nasty and really crappy. And I'm sure she keeps it on the rails. So we definitely need to, if we're having a discussion on Martin Scorsese, we have to bring her up.
Well, I also feel bad that it's been an hour and a half and we're just now mentioning her, because I think you're absolutely right. What's kind of interesting, some might say ironic, is that she has 2 Oscars for 2 Martin Scorsese films before he ever won his Best Director Oscar. And she won the Oscar for Raging Bull. And a lot of people, I think, credit him for what she did. Some of the shots of the flash cubes going off And that's utilized in the film too, meaning you actually see somebody taking a photograph and like the back in the day flash cube
bulbs.
falls out, flash bulb, yeah. But the way that she edits some of the shots where it's the actual flash going off that lights the scene and then cuts to something different is amazing. It gives this feel. I mean, some of those scenes in Raging Bull are hard to watch. Some of them boxing scenes, and not just because of the blood and because of fist, glove on flesh. It has to do with the way it's edited and the way she stays away from. And I'm sure he would have some influence on this too. She stays away from the typical boxing movie shots where it's the glove up against the jaw or in the eye. They're there, but a lot of those scenes are body shots, and a lot of those scenes are punches being thrown, maybe not necessarily connecting to the body or to the face. And the way that it's edited, it's disconcerting because you go to see that shot of the body and the glove almost connects, and then it edits right to a flashbulb or edits right to somebody in the crowd watching. It's because then you never really see it. And it's really disconcerting because it makes it hurt even more. It physically makes it hurt to watch that film. So I think you're absolutely right that we need to bring her up because I would venture to say that they probably have a different language between them.
Yeah.
And if we were to listen to their conversation, we might not even understand it, even though it's English.
Yeah.
Because there's no way. She gets exactly what he wants done. And I'm sure, positive of it, that a lot of things happen because of her.
Yep.
And you're right. She's the no person. Nope, we're not doing that. Yep, we need to do that. That's going slow. I've seen a documentary with them working, and she's just point blank. She was like, well, if you want to bore the audience to death, then keep that in. But let's take it out and look at it. And then, he kind of turns to the camera and he's like, she's right again, or I think he even says that's why she has 3 Oscars or that's why she has 2 Oscars or something like that. Yeah. It's interesting to me that we have these concepts about filmmakers and about masculinity and about how these are guys' films. These are heterosexual, male-centric movies edited by a woman. To me, that says it's not significant that it's directed by a male. It's not significant that it's edited by a female. It's just that the right people doing the right job works. And if you don't mention her, then you're missing out on why he is as great as he is. It's not significant to me that he's a man and she's a woman. I just find it ironic that these gangster films that people have escalated to these pantheon of movie-going experiences, if you were to ask the average moviegoer if they were edited by a woman, they would not know it. That's a shame. And 2, the fact that it's not known is actually kind of brilliant because no one is influenced by what they might think a woman would do or what a man would do. They're just watching a movie that's edited and directed by 2 really superb people in their profession. So I just find that amazing to me that she won the Oscar for Raging Bull. It's like considered a quintessential man's movie. That's why when somebody says chick flick or action flick, it bugs me. 1, I don't like the derogatory tone towards either of them. And 2, I've always said if more males went out and saw these more female-centric movies and more females went out and saw these more male-centric movies, the world would be a much better place. We would realize we're telling the same stories. It's just one starring a guy, one starring a girl. It's the same stuff. It's just done by different people.
It would be one thing if she was, if they were making romantic comedies that are an hour and a half long, but these are films that are in their edited form are 3 hours long, sometimes 3 hours plus long. And just the amount, first of all, the amount of footage I'm sure that he shot to start that process has to be daunting in some ways. And then being able to determine, yes, we do need these shots. Yes, we do need to hang on this shot for this long. No, we don't need this whole section of the movie. Or what does this section of the movie do that could be done in a different way somewhere else that would help to move the story along or that wouldn't bore the audience, even though you thought it was good, or even though the screenwriter thought it was good or was necessary? How can we reshape this to still make those points, or to still move the film forward on a narrative level, but not do it not make it the film slow? And it's hard to make I can't imagine how hard it would be to make a movie that's 2.5 hours long or 3 hours long that is still propelling the audience forward. But they do it, and they've done it multiple times. I want to bring up Wolf of Wall Street because I think that's a perfect example of this. Editing a film that is that long, that has that kind of subject matter, and not wearing down the audience to a nub has got to be difficult. But I think that Wolf of Wall Street is one of my favorite Scorsese films because you can see him utilizing the tricks that and the kind of tools in his tool bag to make a film that is about excess and about capitalism. It's about the government, and it's about corruption. It's about drugs and the excess of emotions and just what people will go to try to, we've talked about, to try to fill that hole in them. And the movie itself is excessive. And I think that's kind of like the meta tag on this film. It's like, we're not going to make an hour and 45-minute long movie on the excess of sex and drugs and money, because that in and of itself is not excessive. We're going to show you all of the things that happened in this guy's life, and then we're going to show you what happens, somewhat at the end. And I guess spoiler for Wolf of Wall Street, but what you think should happen to him in the end, and him getting his just desserts, doesn't happen. And that's even more depressing. There's other movies about things like this, The Big Short, all of those things, that focus in on, if this was a normal narrative film where there's good guys and bad guys, and the good guys win and the bad guys lose, then this movie is nothing like that. It's the opposite. We see the bad guy and we get to laugh at the bad guy, and we get to, we're not really commiserating with him, but we get to see him experience all of these things and then not be happy throughout the film. And then we don't get to see him punished, which is another kind of gut check. But I don't think the film would have been as impactful if it was only 2 hours long. It being 3 hours long helps to bolster the point that they're trying to make in this film. So, and it's insanely funny. Like there's humor in some of Scorsese's movies, but this movie is, I think of it more like a comedy than anything else. Just a dark, sad comedy, I guess, a black comedy more than anything else. But I love it. The performances are great. Jonah Hill obviously is amazing. Rob Reiner's great in the film. I kind of forgot about Rob Reiner until I rewatched it about a week ago, and I'm like, he's so great. And I don't even think he's been in very many movies recently, but like, he's so good in this film. And, everybody down the line, obviously Margot Robbie's amazing. I can't see anybody else in that role. I just can't. And I know there's other people who are up for that role, but she is just a singular, that is a singular character that I can only see portrayed by her right now. And Leonardo DiCaprio is great. Everybody's great. But I think the filmmaking itself is something to really look at, and knowing when to start and stop things. The Matthew McConaughey scene where he's doing the chanting and the beating of the chest, that whole thing. I just found out that was like a warm up that Matthew McConaughey does, that they were just rolling on, and he and they just kept rolling. And there's a shot in there where Leonardo DiCaprio is like looking off camera, and he's like looking really confused. He was looking at Martin Scorsese to be like, what do you want me to do here? Like, what is happening right now? And I guess he was just like, Scorsese was just like, just go with it. And then they kept going on with the scene. But that's the same thing. Can't imagine that film without that scene in it. And talk about somebody who's in a movie for 5 minutes. I mean, that's the Ned Beatty Award right there. Like, dude crushed it. Matthew McConaughey just crushed that character. And it's so great that he didn't come back later on. If we would have seen him later, it would have just been like, oh man, he ended on such a high note. And then, we would have seen him again. But yeah, that's my.
Well, apparently the story behind that goes, somehow they got into a conversation, Matthew McConaughey and Martin Scorsese. And basically Matthew McConaughey said, anytime, any place, any movie, anywhere, anyhow, whatever you need me to do, I want to be in one of your movies. And Martin Scorsese said, well, as a matter of fact, we have this. And he's like, I'll do it. And apparently his people, Matthew McConaughey's people, were like, dude, you're in one scene. Why? Yeah, it's Martin Scorsese. And then it's one of those scenes that will be remembered forever from that movie. And the other scene that will be remembered forever is the Quaalude scene.
Oh my gosh.
Which I have said a million times, if not 1,000,001 times, it will be the scene that will be shown for hundreds of years into film history, not only for Leonardo DiCaprio as an actor, but just as a scene in a movie that is just over. And you know how you see the North by Northwest plane coming over top of Cary Grant. And you see certain scenes in movies over and over again. The beach scene from Here to Eternity, which is deceptive. We've talked about that before, but it is shown over and over and over again. The scene of Dorothy coming out of the house into the Technicolored land of Oz.
The Jaws dolly zoom.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. The Quaalude scene will be that scene that will be shown over and over and over again, because it is just like nothing else in movie history before it. And I would venture to say nothing else afterwards. And I was having a conversation telling somebody we were doing this podcast, and they said, do you know that scene was one take? And I was like, what? No way. That's just, there's a bunch of different shots in there. There's no way that's, and I think that's kind of gotten lost in translation. I don't think it was one shot according to everything.
The stairs is one shot.
Right. Not because it was done so well, and not because he only needed to take one shot. It's because Leo hurt his back and apparently could only do one take of it where you could see his face and that kind of stuff. So I'm not sure if a stunt guy comes in and does some of the car stuff. I'm not sure if that's Leo. I'm not sure what, because that's even more impressive. How he tries to open the car door with his leg. It's just brilliant. Yeah. And then later on you see, he drives home safe. And as an audience member, you're like, how is that possible that he drove home safe? But in the land of somebody who lives in excess,
the unreliable narrator.
Right, exactly. And then of course you see what the reality of it is. Yeah. So for me, The Wolf of Wall Street lit me up because it's like nothing I've ever seen before. And I had somebody tell me that they thought it was self-indulgent because of the excess of the film, and that it was a male-centric film, that only men of a certain type would like this film. Edited by a woman, pretty much executive produced by women and men. I mean, so you can't really, that goes back to what we were saying earlier. For me, you're missing the point. Yeah. For me, my opinion is, if it wasn't as excessive, then the point of the movie can't be made. You can't criticize a film for why the film is what it is based on this narrative or this story of this guy being excessive. You can't get the point of the movie if you don't see all of those things, and then Rob Reiner comes in and tries to give more reality based scene type of thing and be like, hey dude, calm down, blah, blah, blah. Without the excess of that film, you can't get the point of it. So to say it's too excessive for me to enjoy it is missing the point. But that's what people say. Not for me. I loved it. And as for Margot Robbie, once again, it's a performance that stands out in a film filled with all these other great performances. Leonardo DiCaprio being Oscar nominated, Jonah Hill being Oscar nominated his second time. Matthew McConaughey, all of these performances are stunning. She just came alive to the world in that film. She came alive. She's grounded. She's real. The accent is superb. The way that she talks to him is superb. It just sounds like somebody from where she's from in the film. So it's a star-making performance, and it could have just been the really beautiful woman who's put into bad situations, but it's a really beautiful woman who is the voice of reason in that film. although she doesn't handle it as well as some people.
Yeah,
What?
I think that she's just as complicit in all of the things that are going on. She's
To a degree.
utilizing her assets in the same way that Leonardo DiCaprio is utilizing his assets. But I think she understands that she's benefiting from what he's doing, while at the same time she's like, I don't know what he's doing, but the fact that he's got a yacht and a helicopter and an amazing house, like she's still complicit in what's happening. But I don't think that I think that she is still trying to come to terms with how her relationship with him is. And I don't know. I mean, there's parallels between her and the Lorraine Bracco character in Goodfellas, but I don't think so. So what you're saying is that she's the voice of reason. Is that what you said? She's the voice of reason, or she's not the good guy, quote unquote, right? I don't think this movie has any good guys other than Kyle Chandler, maybe.
Once again, well, it's kind of his job, right?
Yeah.
Meaning his job in the film.
Yeah.
Well, there comes a limit. There comes a point where the excess is too much, and they have a kid, and she's trying to take their relationship and their environment into a different level of normalcy, for whatever that means, with a helicopter landing on your yard and a pool that you never have to clean, as normal as you can get. So I do think she's the voice of reason to a degree. I don't necessarily think anyone could understand what somebody's doing if you're not involved in what he's doing. Like, how does she know what he does during the day?
She doesn't.
It's not like she has any reason to, it's not like she has any reason to believe that it's not on the up and up until she knows it's not on the up and up. And then she could have very easily been that character in a movie where they go, okay, we need to hide this, we need to burn this, we need to shred this. She doesn't do that. She's like, dude, you got to stop doing what you got to do. You got to stop doing drugs. You got to stop drinking. We got a kid and all that other stuff, and sort of puts him on the path of less excess.
Well, and in that way,
and that's saying a lot.
Yeah, in that way, you never see her. Does she do drugs? He does drugs like on her. So she's definitely around the drugs in the film, but because right when they pull up to where his apartment is, and she's in the back of the limo with Leonardo DiCaprio, and he goes out and his first wife finds them and confronts him. Is that her? I don't know. I'd have to go back and look. That might just be a random woman. I don't know. But
no, I think it is her.
Okay, I think it is her. Either way, but
I can't remember.
But what it comes down to is she's definitely not she's definitely not addicted to drugs in the film. We don't see her being addicted to drugs. We see her as a good mother, and we see her as someone who's the stable person in the relationship. So that in and of itself is you're right. She's definitely a better parent and a more stable person. But the moment that he runs across problems, she's out and she's like, I'm taking the kids. And it was like, it seemed very vindictive as opposed to like, like I'm taking the kids because of safety. I don't know. It just seemed, she should have taken the kids.
There's a lot of stuff that happens from the time they meet to the time she decides that she makes that decision.
You're right.
I mean, let's do all the drugs while we're going to die in a yacht on the sea.
She wants all the money, and she wants.
Of course she does. That's what people do.
She wants all the things. She loves the thing. She loves the benefits of him doing what he's doing, and she's not willing to ask him how he's getting the things that he's getting, and she's willing to take, but not be complicit in it. So, or at least not be overly complicit in it. So I don't know. I mean, she's definitely a better person than him in a lot of ways, but at the same time, she's not the beacon of greatness, I guess. So I'm not trying to come down on her as a woman. I'm just trying to say.
No, I got what you're saying. I got what you're saying.
She's not the the Virgin Mary in this thing. It's a little bit more complex.
No, of course not. Yeah, totally. But that's not what I was saying. What I was saying was you do need that middle ground, or that, and it could be her rationalizing stuff, but she definitely seems to ground him in a different way. I'll give you a prime example. When they find out what's her name dies, when they find out her aunt dies, It's her aunt, right?
Oh,
Yeah.
that's so good.
And he's like, but we got to blah, blah. And she's like, we got to go to the funeral. What is wrong with you?
Because of all the money. He's like, oh no. He's like, this is so horrible. And he's playing it
Right.
like I'm so like emotionally invested in your aunt. But
that's one of the best
I love
scenes
that
too
scene.
in that film.
Yeah.
The one between him and her.
Oh, and then right after that, we see Shea Wiggum. Who's in like 2 scenes and who has no reason to be in this movie. Like as an actor, like you see him in a lot of different films and he's really good in all of them. He's a great actor, but he's no reason to be in this film because I feel like he's a better actor than what would be needed. But because it's a Scorsese film, Scorsese can get him to do the character of the yacht captain where he's like, oh, well, we might get into some chop and, well, I guess we'll just batten down the hatches. And he's saying it like he's never piloted a boat before. And I love it. He's like, oh, what do you say in this scene? Or what do you say in this scenario? Well, I guess we'll just have to batten down the hatches. It's like.
All right. So it's Aunt Emma is the character and it's Joanne Lumley who is the actress.
Absolutely Fabulous.
Yeah. That's where everybody connects her, but she really is something above and beyond that, although that she is great in that. But that one scene between them two is great. But
on the park bench?
Brings us to the point. It's so great. It was supposed to be somebody else. I can't remember who it was. It's supposed to be somebody like Jessica Lange or somebody. I can't remember. Okay. But they had to drop out and he picked up her and, I don't know who it was supposed to be, but that scene is spectacular. And she's very good in that scene because she's the voice of reason. She's the only one who makes any sense out of anybody because everybody else is doing things for alternative reasons.
Yeah. And he uses the voiceover again. So like he's doing, we're voiceover throughout the whole film, but then the only time we have another character with voiceover is when she says, is he hitting on me? And that is perfect. It's the only time that's used in the film and it's used to switch because we're like, she is hitting on him. And then it's like, boop. And then we get that there's a period of time where she's not hitting on him. He thinks she is because he's totally screwed out of his mind on drugs. And we get that really awkward kiss. It's so well done how that's another way that Scorsese is able to turn the prism one more way to be like, I'm going to show you the scene. But what we don't realize as moviegoers is that he's been showing us this scene from DiCaprio's point of view the whole time. And then when we get her voiceover, it's like, nope, this is what reality is. The reality is he is, out of his mind on coke or ludes or whatever he's out of his mind on. And the reality of the world around him is totally different than what he's experiencing. So it's masterfully done. And those are the scenes that don't get talked about as much, I guess. But that's the stuff that it's like really in there.
That encapsulates the whole film.
Yeah.
You could watch that scene and know what that movie's all about. Just that scene. Yeah. Because it's interesting because it's the voice of reason again. And it's just subtle in the way that she's like, you're sweating in the middle of like a cold day. Like what, like I'm not stupid, but she never says any of that. She's just like, you're sweating, she does say something else after that. But so for me, it's interesting in the middle of all this craziness, there's these small scenes, some of them crazy too, like the smoke crack scene with Jonah Hill. It's just so reserved in a way, but at the same time, so over the top, and especially the check, show me a check and I'll quit my job right now. I mean, that diner scene is it's just normal. It's just got a normal pace to it amongst all this excess that describes this guy's life. And it's interesting to me that a movie that is as crazy over the top, because normally I don't like big over the top things. As an actor, I do, but as a film goer, I'm not overly enthused by things like that. But there's something about The Wolf of Wall Street. I don't know what it is. And I remember people talking about it, how Scorsese is not going to get nominated for director and it's not going to get nominated and blah, blah. It's too over the top. And I was like, you all are wrong on all fronts. Jonah Hill will receive his second Oscar nomination. People thought I was crazy. I saw that scene where they're taping the money to the lady on the Tonight Show. And Jonah Hill with his little accent said, you're taping money to your blah, blah, blah. I was like, Jonah Hill's going to get his second Oscar nomination. Leo might finally win his Oscar. And there was a time where people believed he could take it from Matthew McConaughey a couple weeks before the Oscar. Scorsese will be nominated. The film will be nominated. It will be a movie of our lifetime. And people are like, well, you know, history dictates something different. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Just saying.
Yep. Well, I'm really excited to see The Irishman, and I think just spending this time over the last couple weeks going over his previous films have really gotten me, you know, more reinvigorated. Because it's not, you know, Scorsese's not someone who I'll necessarily like go back to purposefully. It's not in my heavy rotation of films that I rewatch. Although I think Wolf of Wall Street will become part of a heavy rotation of films that I watch maybe once a year or so. But yeah, so I'm excited to see what he can do with a huge budget, a big canvas, and based on a true story, and all of these great actors and actresses that are able to play in this playground that he's had a couple years to get together. So.
Yeah, we'll see. I can't wait on so many levels. And it's interesting that you said that Scorsese films are not in your heavy rotation, with the exception of possibly The Wolf of Wall Street. I'm not sure they're meant to be, because I'm not sure how much you can take in on a regular basis. Yeah. You know, it's not one of those films you put on in the background while you clean your bathroom. It's just not. It can't be. They possess you to watch them, and they get inside you, and you can't think of anything but what's going on the screen while you're watching them. And I think maybe that's why I hesitated to watch The Irishman on Netflix, because I knew that my phone could ring, or I could get on Twitter or whatever. I didn't want anything pulling me away from it. That said, I'm not sure anything could, because they just encompass your world for those 2.5, 3 hours. And, you know, those are long times to watch a movie without an intermission, without a break, that kind of stuff. So I feel like, I know this is kind of quirky, but for me, it's like going to church. You don't ever get on your phone when you're at church. You don't ever text anybody while you're at church. Oh, I never did. Mm-hmm. You are in that ceremony while it's happening, because that is all you need for your life right now. And in that way, I compare going to the movies, especially a Scorsese film. You're in that world only for that period of time. And to see it on the big screen, I think, is important, just because of his love for movies in general. It's almost a reverence type thing. So I can't wait.
Yeah, that's great. All right. Well, so next week we will be talking about Scorsese's new film, The Irishman. So stay tuned for that. And you can check us out on the web at actorandengineer.com. You can go to facebook.com/actorandengineer, and you can tweet us at actorengineer. And we'll see you next time.